My name is Glenn Hendrick, and I'm the program coordinator for Alchemy Arts Center. We're a small nonprofit art center on San Juan Island in Washington, and our mission is to create art access for islanders. Part of what we do is we welcome folks in from outside of our tiny community to interact with us and engage with us and give compelling talks like Lonnie is about to do. So we're very happy to have him here. Um, so Lonnie Potter is joining us from Omaha, Nebraska. And he's been working on these talks for a few years now. They're leading up to a podcast series. Lonnie is an artist and an educator. He received his MFA from the Art Institute in 2005. That's how I know him. We went to the same school. He's traveled a lot. He's an incredible painter, and he's shown in solo shows, group shows across the country. And we're so happy to have him tonight talking about art and survival. So, oh, and then also I just wanted to let folks know, in case you haven't done Zoom before, I'm assuming folks have, but maybe not. You are all muted for now. We're just going to keep everybody muted throughout this talk while Lonnie gives his talk. And then at the end, we're going to have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So yeah, and you're welcome to turn your cameras on too if you'd like, if you want to have your faces involved, or you can leave your camera off. But with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Lonnie. So thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate that introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. First of all, I want to thank Alchemy Art Center for hosting this event. And secondly, of course, thank you guys for showing up and sharing your time with us today. I know you have a lot of demands on your time, so I appreciate the leap of faith you've taken to trust me with your time and attention. And again, one thing I want to point out, if you have any questions as we're going along, if you look at the bottom of your screen, if you roll your kind of cursor over it, there'll be a button that says chat. There's a bunch of buttons that pop up. One of them says chat. If you push that button, it'll open a window to the side where you could maybe type some questions you think of as I'm going along. You can use it kind of like a little note-taking area. And then you can send them to me. There's a list at the bottom left. There's a thing that says choose who do you send it to. Choose me, Lonnie Potter. And I'll try to answer those questions during the Q&A session at the end. Okay. Okay, so again, my name is Lonnie Potter, and I'm here today to talk to you about what the arts are for. What practical value do the arts have? Why do we have them? Why do we need them? How do they help us? So to answer those questions, we need to cover 3 different topics today. And those topics are, share my screen. First one is arts. We're going to have to talk about the arts. And we're going to talk about what the arts are, and what they do, and also why do we need them. And the second topic we're going to need to cover today to answer those questions about what are the arts for is imagination. Imagination. What is imagination? What does it do? And why do we need it? And the third thing we're going to talk about today is survival. And we're going to talk particularly about how the arts and imagination connect to survival. So the reason we're going to be talking about those 3 subjects in that order is that the basic premise of this talk is that the arts grow imagination, and our imagination is what we use to survive. That imagination is what connects the arts to survival. It's a sort of logical bridge that gets you from one to the other. So that's the game plan of this talk. Those 3 parts, arts, imagination, and survival, in that order. So let's start with the first one, arts. Okay, the first thing I want to do to kind of give us some sort of hope that there is some logical connection between the arts and survival is to point out that there are 3 things we already know about the arts, 3 ways that humans relate to the arts that strongly suggest that we need them to survive. So I want to start by looking at these 3 characteristics, 3 odd distinguishing features of how humans relate to their arts. So one weird thing about the arts is that they are ever present, ever present. So if you look around, anytime in history, anywhere you look on Earth, if you find humans there, you'll also find the arts. We find them in modern cities and prehistoric caves, vast ancient empires, and tiny nomadic tribes. So everywhere, everyone, and everybody has some form of the arts. It might be as simple and ancient as songs, carved wooden flutes, and body decoration, or it could be the latest high tech, real time, immersive digital entertainment. But if the arts had nothing to do with survival, you would expect to find them only some of the time in some places. You'd be able to find plenty of examples of groups of people who survived just fine without them. But the fact that all humans have the arts, every time, every place, is a very strong sign that they are somehow needed to survive. Basically, all the anthropological evidence we have tells us that everybody that had the arts made it through, and all the ones who didn't have them didn't make it. Another strange thing about the arts is that the arts are resource devouring. So, what do I mean by that? So much of our limited physical and mental energy, our scarce time and attention, not to mention our materials, electrical power, and money, is eaten up by both making and engaging with the arts. So let's stop and think about that for a moment. Let's think about just one of those resources, time. So think about all the songs you've ever heard from the time you were a little baby listening to nursery rhymes to now. So music on headphones when you were a teenager in your room, music in your car, on your phone. If you collected all of that time, music in the background of movies and commercials, piped in music in stores and elevators, every concert or live band you've ever seen, that soundtrack of your life, how many hours have you devoted to listening to music? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands? Now multiply that by every other form of the arts that you enjoy, all the movies, TV shows, novels, etc., and then multiply that number by every other human on earth from the distant past to the present moment who has spent their life with the arts. Clearly, we've invested untold millions of hours of human effort into this one group project we call the arts. And that's just considering how much of our time we've spent. What about all the materials? Entire forests gobbled up to spit out guitars and books, or the billion barrels of oil pumped into plastic for CDs, DVDs, television to computers. Not to mention the physical energy, all those bodies moving and sweating and making. It's exhausting to think about. And money, we haven't even gotten to the money question yet. How many treasure troves of ancient gold coins and modern day digital credit have human beings forked over to repeat these odd habits over the centuries? Yet somehow we still think of the arts as being unrelated to our survival. So, from the point of view of a biologist, every animal, every plant, every living thing has limited resources at hand to use to survive. They have certain things nearby that they can use for food, energy, shelter, and their bodies have ways to process energy, attack, and defend. Any organism that wastes these sources of power is likely to lose out to their neighbor that knows how to use them better. So survival is all about taking everything you have, everything within you and everything around you, and putting it towards not dying. So the idea that we, the human animals, somehow get a free pass around this rule with the arts doesn't really make sense. If all the power and attention and stuff we poured into the arts weren't helping us to survive, we wouldn't still be here. Our bones would have joined the dinosaurs long ago. So the arts are one, ever present, two, resource devouring, and what else? Three, the arts are pleasure giving. So I think that's pretty obvious. We realize that the arts give us pleasure. Everybody knows that. But if you think about it, the arts are so resource devouring and ever present because they give us pleasure, right? But pleasure is also the strongest clue that we need the arts to survive. Now, I'm not suggesting that pleasure is automatically good, that anything that is pleasurable will help you survive. We can easily think of too many people who chased after pleasure until it killed them. Clearly not a check in the win category when it comes to survival. But many of our most basic urges, like eating and mating, they move us through pleasure towards actions to make sure that we, and therefore our species, survive. If you take away an animal's desire to eat, they're not likely to live for much longer. So pleasure is just in nature's way of pushing us to do over and over things that will help us to not die. And it makes us do these things without needing to explain why. It's actually a very efficient setup if you think about it. An automatic program that gets us to carry out good, meaning survival helping habits. It says, hey, dummy, I don't have time to explain why you should do this, but look, if you do this and you keep doing this, it'll feel good, okay? So people that feel pleasure when doing something that helps them survive, like eating or mating, are therefore more likely to live. And if they live long enough, they are also more likely to pass on through the DNA they give to their children that same tendency to feel pleasure in those same life-saving and life-spreading behaviors. This is why, to most of us, pleasure seems to be the point of the arts. Hey, why are you listening to that song or watching that movie? Pleasure. Why did you read that entire series of books or binge watch that whole season of a TV show? Pleasure. We liked it. We enjoyed it. It was fun. It was interesting. And since we do it because of pleasure, we don't really have to know why it helps us. We'll still do it anyway, and it will still help. So, pleasure encourages survival enhancing habits. But what is it about these bizarre activities called the arts that is so necessary to our survival that human brains are wired to crave, create, and chase after them? What do the arts do for us that is important enough to inspire this pleasure? In other words, how are the arts helping us to not die? To me, the weirdest characteristic of how we humans relate to the arts is that we don't know the answer to that question. We don't know what they are for, despite the fact they are everywhere, despite the fact that we throw everything we have into them, despite all the pleasure the arts have given us for tens of thousands of years, we still don't know why we're doing this or what it's all about. But that's the question I'm going to answer right now. So, what are the arts for? What do the arts do? Why are the arts a survival skill? I can answer that question very simply with just three words: arts, grow, imagination. That's what the arts are, that's what they do, and that's how they help us. That's why we have them, and that's why we need them to survive. That's why they're ever present, why they eat up our resources, why they give us pleasure, because arts grow imagination. So the arts are all the things that do this work, growing human imagination. They're all the stuff we make that helps us grow each other's imagination. And they're all the things you know and love, like music, movies, TV shows, novels, as well as plays, ballets, paintings, sculpture, comic books, cartoons, all the popular and fine arts that you and people around you enjoy. All of them are just ways we've found to help each other grow imagination. So, if you're wondering whether or not something is a work of the arts, ask yourself if a main or major impact of it is to challenge and help our imagination to grow. If it is, and it does, it's a work of the arts. Okay, so what every work of the arts has in common is that they all ask us, can you imagine this? They all challenge us to imagine, and they give us help to rise to these challenges. So even a joke is a work of the arts. I'll give you an example. Jokes are nice, short, small works of the arts. Okay, here's my joke. Ready? Here it comes. What time do you go to the dentist? Answer, tooth hurty. Tooth hurty. I like that one. Okay. Uh, now, there are two things happening in this joke and in every work of the arts. One is a challenge. In this joke, I'm challenging you to see if you can notice the similarity of sounds between the words to and 30 and tooth and hurdy, which is a funny made up word, a kind of mini challenge in itself. So I gave you a challenge, but I also gave you some help. I told you something to do with time and with dentists, so you could think about that and then hear the words I was about to say as sounding like both a time of day and a reason you would go to a dentist, namely because your tooth is hurty. And now that I've ruined that joke forever by explaining it, because a joke is like a frog. You can dissect it and learn about the frog, but the frog dies. Now that I've done that, I want to point out that all works of the arts have both imagination challenges and imagination help in them. So a song may ask you to imagine feeling differently. That's a challenge. A movie or a TV show may ask you to imagine being a different person. A novel may ask you to imagine living in a different kind of world or another planet. And the help they give you to rise to these imagination challenges is all the stuff in the work, all the ideas, tools, models, and materials that we need to do this imagining. Okay, we have so many different forms of the arts, but this is kind of what unites them all into a single identity, a group we can call the arts. They all help our imagination to grow by encouraging us to imagine new ways of perceiving, thinking, knowing, feeling, and behaving. They let us try on new ways of being, and this is what causes our imagination to grow. Okay. So yeah, this is what the arts are, and this is what they do. They are all the things we make for each other that help us to stretch, expand, and deepen our ability to imagine. But what about our last question? Why do we need the arts? Why do we need this imagination growing help? In other words, why are the arts necessary or important? Why do we need them to survive? Okay, so to answer that question, we'll have to move on to our next topic, topic number 2, imagination. Okay, so first thing we need to do is talk about imagination, because in order to understand why imagination growing, the imagination growing that the arts do is important, we'll need to understand why imagination itself is important, why imagination is necessary to our survival. So here we are, imagination, and as I said at the top, what is imagination? What does it do? And why do we need it? The shortest definition of imagination I have is another 3-word definition, and that is imagination equals thinking otherwise. So imagination is the ability to change or move thought, to think about something different, to move from one idea to another, or to think about the same thing, but in another different way. Imagination is the ability we have to shift what we're thinking about or the way we're thinking about it. It's what a psychologist would call cognitive flexibility. So that's what imagination is. But what does imagination do? Or rather, what does imagination allow us to do? What do we need it for? What do we need imagination for? How does this ability to think otherwise help us? Well, that's a pretty big topic to tackle in a short talk, but let's see if we can't cover some of the main points. We use our imagination so much, so often, so consistently and continuously that we don't really notice it. It reminds me of the story I heard the author, David Foster Wallace, tell, which is not his story, but he told it pretty well, about the 2 young fish. So, 2 young fish are swimming along the ocean. Some of you probably know this one. When an older fish swims by them going the other direction. As the older fish passes them, he says, "How's the water, boys?" And the 2 young fish keep swimming for a little bit till one says to the other, "What's water?" So, what water is to fish, imagination is to human beings. We're swimming in it right now. We don't usually notice it, but our survival depends upon it. Fish can't survive without water, and humans can't survive without imagination. And there are 2 basic ways we use our imagination all day, every day, including right now, to survive. And these 2 ways we use imagination are transparency and transformation. So let's start first with transparency. Transparency, what is it? Transparency is using imagination to find out what is true so we can know. So transparency is one way we use our imagination, and we use it to turn perceptions into knowledge. Our imagination helps us to see the truth clearly, to find out what is true. And it does this by inventing both questions and guesses to get at the answers we need, figuring out what's real, actual, and factual. So if you ever say to yourself in your head, "What's that?" Your imagination created that question, and it also creates all the guesses to get at the answer about whatever that might be. So you're using your imagination to ask questions and make guesses all day long. So here's a little diagram to explain a little bit further. So every moment we are awake and alive, including right now, you are using your imagination in this way. Information is pouring in from the left side there through your 5 perceptual senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. And your imagination is processing this data and turning it into some idea of what's happening. This is what I mean when I say transparency. It's your imagination interpreting these sensations into knowledge there in the center. For example, let's run through each of those senses right now. Sight. Okay, so right now you are seeing images in this video, our faces, the slide that I'm showing you, maybe my expression, and all the other things around you, of course, in the room you're in. See sound, you're hearing my voice and the words I'm trying to say. Smell, if we take a deep breath, everybody inhale, okay. Perhaps you can smell the soap you bathe with or the fabric softener in your clothing. See taste. Well, maybe you're not eating anything right now, but feel free to, of course, as long as you have the mute on. But maybe some taste lingers in your mouth from that garlic sandwich you ate earlier. Tasty, right? And maybe for touch, you can feel the chair you're sitting on and the clothes you're wearing. But the point here is that your imagination is what you're using to pull all the information your senses are giving you right now into a coherent picture of what's going on, where you are, and what's happening. So transparency is what happens when your imagination makes sense of your senses. It's how and why humans are able to know, to turn perceptions into knowledge. Okay, so transparency is how our imagination helps us to see things clearly, to know things, or to find out what's true. Transformation is something else. Transformation is using imagination to cause something new so we can change. So, what does that mean? So, transformation is the power imagination gives us to take the knowledge we have and use it to choose behavior. So, let's go to another diagram here. So, this is kind of the other side of the coin here. So imagination turns to that stockpile of information that we made called knowledge, all of our best guesses about what is real, actual, and factual that we gathered through the first part, transparency. And it uses that information to generate options for possible behaviors and then carry them out. New ways we can be, using imagination to transform ourselves, how we relate to others, and the world around us. So every moment of your waking life, again, including this one, you are dealing with this constant stream of reports from your senses. So let's show you another image here. So incoming perceptions coming in. And what you have to do with that is figure out the answer to the question, what's going on? What's happening? And while you're doing this, you also have to answer another question, which is, what should I do now? Or what should I make happen? And we do this all day long. We're continuously asking ourselves, okay, what should I do next? We try something, right? And then we get feedback through our senses on the left about how that went, interpret that information into knowledge with our imagination, transparency. And then we use that new knowledge to make new options for what to do, choose from those options, and then initiate or carry out our newest next behavior, transformation. So we spend our days and our lives trying to know and trying out changes, as sort of bouncing back and forth between these two modes of imagining, transparency and transformation. And as you can see, imagination is so important because it processes everything coming into consciousness through perception, and it generates everything heading out of consciousness and into the world through our behavior and actions. What we do with what comes in and what we make that goes out are both determined by our imagination. This is why so much of who you are, what your life is, and the effect you have on the world around you is determined by what kind of imagination you have. How strong and healthy is it? How good are you at interpreting the information coming in through your senses? And what kind of behaviors do you send out, initiate, and put out into the world? Okay, so I've talked about arts and we talked about imagination. Now I want to talk about our third and last subject, survival. So I want to talk about how these modes that imagination gives us, transparency and transformation, are behind all of our uniquely human survival skills. Now I'm thinking here of ways of being that are beneficial to both the individual and the group, what are often called virtues. So virtues are just, I mean things like courage, humaneness, justice, and selflessness. So these abilities, they're considered human strengths because they work. They are virtuous or good because they help both the individual and the group to not just survive, but thrive. And they work every time. Virtues are simply very practical survival skills that are always win-win. They protect and connect us in ways that promote growth. And the reason I'm bringing up virtues now, these helpful ways of being, is because virtues are survival skills and they all require imagination. Now, the reason they all require imagination is because all virtues depend upon what we've just been talking about, transparency and transformation, those two modes. Their success depend upon our ability to accurately process sense perceptions into knowledge, transparency, and then take that knowledge and then use it to make and choose options for action, transformation. For example, let's take a closer look at one of these virtues, courage. Courage, if you think about it, can only occur if you can correctly assess the situation, right? If you don't know what's going on, if you can't read the conditions, if you can't find out what's true, you won't be able to understand if or when courageous action is required. You won't be able to see clearly, transparency, whether courage is needed. So let's give an example. So let's say you're walking down a residential street and you think you hear someone shouting fire. Burst into action, dash into a building, grab a little old lady and her cat, hustle them out to the safety of the sidewalk. But it turns out that someone shouted higher, not fire, which is an easy perceptual mistake to make, but you also ignored all the other information from your senses that there was no fire. You couldn't see any flames, you couldn't smell any smoke. Now you've accidentally broken into someone's house and kidnapped Granny and Mrs. Snugglepuss. So basically, you got it wrong, right? You were unable to use your imagination to find out what was true, to understand things clearly. You did not know what was happening. The situation was not transparent to you. Or, changing it up a bit, let's say you saw and heard everything correctly, but you just misinterpreted with your imagination what your senses were telling you. So, similar thing, walking down the street, hear shouts of fire, fire, but you smell the smoke, you see the flames and smoke pouring out of the windows, and you think to yourself, oh, they must be filming a movie. I better get off the set before I ruin this take. And you walk away. In both cases, of course, your imagination failed to achieve transparency, failed to read the situation correctly, so courage was not achieved. What you did wasn't virtuous because it didn't help any individuals or group. Let's say you are able to achieve the first part, transparency. You're able to see and understand clearly what is going on. The next step for courage to work is new action, transformation. Your imagination has to turn to its knowledge and use it to generate choices for how to address this pressing need, then make a decision, and then actually carry it out. This is what transformation is, causing new things to happen. Of course, courage can break down at any one of those stages in transparency or transformation. Perhaps you're just a little kid that doesn't know what to do. You don't have enough knowledge to make options out of. Maybe you have knowledge, but you're just not good at coming up with options, or can't decide from your options which one to pick. Or maybe you're just plain scared stiff and can't bring yourself to do the thing you've already decided must be done, and that's certainly understandable. But if you stand on the sidewalk in front of a burning building, dreaming up all sorts of brave behaviors, but don't actually do any of them, that's not courage. Courage is activated, is made useful and helpful only through action. Action is what carries courage across the finish line. But my central point here is that imagination is needed at every stage along the way in virtues, including courage, from interpreting sense information correctly to having already stockpiled the knowledge to turn to being able to create possible options from that knowledge, critiquing and weighing those options so as to choose one, and then finally causing this new action, this helpful behavior to actually happen. Each one of those moments along the way is an imaginative act, and your success at each of those stages depends upon the strength of your imagination. Your imaginative strength will determine whether or not you will be able to see and do what is needed to be courageous or any other virtue. So this applies to all virtues, these same abilities to see and do, to know and change, what I'm calling transparency and transformation. They're at the root of all human virtues. So justice cannot happen unless we can know what's happening and change what's happening, right? Humaneness requires the ability to see clearly what help others need and come up with ways to give them this help. Selfishness can only occur, or sorry, selflessness can only occur when someone can see the truth that it's not all about them, and they can cause new behaviors that benefit the world around them. So without the transparency and transformation that imagination gives us, virtues are actually impossible. We would be unable to hope or persevere and forgive. Without imagination, we wouldn't be able to be tolerant, patient, humble, or kind. No one would be able to be generous, caring, empathetic, grateful, or prudent. We need imagination to plan, to have foresight, curiosity, or a thirst for knowledge. Without imagination, we wouldn't be able to hope. Without imagination, we wouldn't be able to love. And all these so-called virtues, which are really just incredibly practical survival skills, ways that individuals and groups can help each other survive and thrive, all of them need imagination because they require the ability to know and the ability to change, to see the true and cause the new. So this is why the health, strength, and growth of imagination is so important, because all of our other uniquely human survival skills depend upon it. Our success at surviving and thriving in the past, present, and future depend upon our imagination. Okay, so to finish for today, I'd like to give you one more example to sort of drive home the importance of imagination and the arts to our survival. An example I hope you can hold on to and carry with you when we're done here today. So later when someone says, hey, how was that talk? Or what did you learn? You can tell them this. So a moment ago, I recited a list of virtues. They're survival skills, really, right? There's just ways that humans can be that help us, one and all, to not just get by, but to get better. One of the most important of these skills, these virtues that I didn't mention, is problem solving. Um, our world, the world we humans make for each other, has always been and is likely to always be full of problems that we've made for ourselves. But it is becoming clearer and clearer, I think, that these problems are real dangers. Threats not only to the survival of individual people, but to the survival of our nation and perhaps species. And most of the biggest problems we face today are not new. Systemic racism, gun control, global warming, whatever issues make you dread checking your newsfeed, most of them are not new. Even our current pandemic, which is new, granted, the reasons why it's really bad are old. The reasons why we're unable to come together and address it have been around for a long time. So the pandemic has just pointed out to us how many old problems we've had simmering under the surface that we haven't solved yet. So most of our problems are old. They've been around for a while and we've known about them for some time now. So why do they still exist? Why are they still problems? What prevents us from solving them? Well, there are two things you need to solve any problem. I'm thinking here of societal problems, but really this applies to personal problems as well. And the two things you need to solve any problem are, first thing you have to have is you have to, there we go. You have to know better. So the problems we have, they usually arise because we made choices in the past that we didn't know were going to create a problem. We didn't know any better. And those problems continue today because we still don't know any better, right? We haven't yet learned what we need to know to fix the problem. So problems both exist, they begin, and they persist, they continue because of a lack of knowledge, because we don't know better. If we knew better to begin with, we would have never caused the problem in the first place. And until we know better, until we learn what we need to know, we won't be able to stop the problem. The other thing necessary to solving any problem is we have to change better. So the problem started in the past when we made a bad change, a change we didn't realize was going to cause a future problem. And the problem is still around today because we still haven't made the necessary changes that would stop the problem from existing. So if you change nothing or the wrong things or change them in the wrong ways, the problem will of course continue and they usually get worse. So this is the place we find ourselves in today as a country and as a living thing on this planet. We have a whole list of unaddressed problems that threaten our survival. What can we do? How will we fix these problems, old and new? Well, whatever problem keeps you up at night, it can only be solved by knowing better and changing better. And the point of this whole talk is you can't know better or change better until you can imagine better. And this is what the arts are for. This is why we need them and how they help us to survive. The arts are how we help each other imagine better so that we can know better and change better. So this is why the arts are so crucial to our survival, because the health, strength, and growth of human imagination depends upon the arts, and the health, strength, and growth of humanity depend upon our imagination. As I often say, the arts keep imagination alive and growing, so imagination can keep us alive and growing. And a lack of imagination, unhealthy or weak imaginations, means a world without virtues. Instead of courage, we'll get cowardice. We get injustice instead of justice, cruelty when we need humaneness, selfishness when we need selflessness. So an inability to imagine has real world consequences that we can see and experience every day. People that cannot care about others are intolerant, impatient, unkind, have no humility, cannot forgive. This lack of imagination is unfortunately measurable. It has a body count. People suffer and die every day. They're suffering and dying at this very moment because we lack the imagination strength to know better and change better. We don't have an imagination that is strong enough to learn and change in ways that would end this needless suffering. And this isn't just because we're in a pandemic. It's always been like this. But we need this imagination strength now more than ever. Our individual and collective survival as a nation and as a species depend upon it. So that's how we got here. We got here because we did not grow each other's imagination enough. And the reason why we didn't do that is mainly because we did not understand that this is what the arts and imagination are for. We were unconscious of our need for a stronger imagination and of what we could do to make our imagination stronger. So that's why I'm giving this talk, because becoming aware, having transparency about this, realizing that, oh, this is what the arts are for and why we need them, what imagination is for and why we need it to be strong, healthy, and growing. If we know all of this, then that means we can change it. We can start transformation, changing our understanding of them so that we will value them enough to intentionally improve both our arts and imagination, increasing our chances to not only survive this moment, but thrive and do even better in the future. So, what can you do? How can you help yourself and others when we're done with this talk, now that you know this? What can you do to make things better? How can you use what you now know to change? How can this knowing better lead to changing better? So let's generate some options for behavior that you can choose from. Well, you can help with those things I just mentioned: understanding, valuing, and intentionally improving both the arts and imagination. So you have to understand them first in order to realize they have value. And once you really realize they have value, then you can intentionally improve those things. So what you can do is you can help everyone to understand more, help them to know better by sharing what you've learned here today about the arts and imagination with others. Tell people why the arts are important. Help them understand the value of the arts and the value of imagination. Tell them why it's such a practical thing to do, why we need the imagination growth the arts provide to survive. So you can spread the word, or you can just share the video of this talk with people. Send them the link to this video on Alchemy Art Center's website. You can start the discussion. You can make this something people talk about. So more people will understand and value the arts and imagination. And if you want to help yourself understand more, if you want to learn more, come back for more. Tell us if you enjoyed this talk and you want us to do more of them. Also, if you think of any questions in the coming days, you can send them to me at my email address, which is emaillonnieonline@gmail.com. It's easy to remember because the words Lonnie and online have the same letters. So email lonnieonline@gmail. Send me your questions. I'd be delighted to help you with anything that was unclear, or if you just want to talk about related topics that we didn't cover today. I can then also, if you want, let you know when and where I'll be doing other talks, if you want to grow your understanding about these subjects more, if you want more specific details about how to make and choose arts that will grow imagination, or what are the characteristics of works that grow our imagination best, or maybe you want to know more about what new things we can do now that we know this. How else can we use this transparency to transform? Because what we know changes what we can make and do. So the question might be, how does knowing what the arts and imagination are for open up whole new sets of possibilities for humanity to get better in the future at intentionally improving not just the arts and imagination, but everything? How does this knowledge help us to consciously participate in our own evolution? So those are things you can do about knowing better, right? Understanding and valuing. But the other thing you can do is to intentionally improve, change for the better, right? So you can support art centers like this one by donating time or money. It's certainly much easier to donate to art centers once you understand clearly why the work they do is important. Oh, so they're helping to keep the arts alive, and then the arts are helping keeping imagination alive, and then imagination is keeping us alive. Okay, yeah, here's my money. So if you appreciated this talk, go to Alchemy Art Center's homepage, scroll down to the bottom and donate, or donate to an art center near you. Do whatever you can to promote and support the arts that grow our imagination. And also, you can apply what I've talked about here today, make some changes. Ask yourself whether the arts you support with your money, time, and attention actually grow your imagination. One of my hopes is that people will use the information here to cast a more critical eye on what they support and think about whether or how much those things actually challenge and help their imagination to grow. Are they really helping you to think otherwise? If they do, then great. Support those authors, musicians, actors, those arts makers. Make sure the people who really grow our imagination get supported so they can continue and get more chances to do this necessary work for you and for others. And if maybe if you're an arts maker, you can use the things you learn from these talks. You can think about how you can fold these ideas into your practice. Can you make work that can grow our imagination better? What would those works need to be like? What would you have to learn to get better at to do that? So my challenge to you, my suggestion for how you can behave if you want, is twofold. Know the arts and imagination better, so understand and value them better, so that you can change the arts and imagination better. Intentionally improve imagination and the arts for yourself and others in any way that you can. So do it for yourself and everyone around you. It's a sound investment in the future of humanity because the arts grow the imagination human beings need to get better at being human. The arts keep our imagination alive and growing, so our imagination can keep us alive and growing. Okay, that's it. That's my talk. So next we're going to do a kind of a question and answer part. So I said at the beginning that if you wanted to put something in the chat screen, you could maybe put a question there. So I'll see if anyone has any questions in there. But then if we have some, we'll answer those. But after that, we'll go right into live questions. And remember that you're muted right now. So I think maybe a quick shortcut is if you want to speak up during that part, that I think you can just hit the space bar and while you want to talk so we can hear you. And then you let go of the space bar when you're done, kind of like a walkie-talkie, but you don't have to say over. Okay, so let's see if we have any questions in the chat thing. So, questions about getting your camera on. That's not easy. Okay, that's good. I had a powerful point. I'm glad I had a powerful point. Okay, thanks, Maria. Appreciate it. All right, anyone have any questions? Just go ahead and hit the space bar so we can hear you. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, thank you.
Have you done talks specifically geared towards artists and makers to address that question of how to better grow imagination through your art?
Mostly what I focused on is I try to make it just for everybody because everyone enjoys the arts, some form of the arts, but not everyone makes it. But I did kind of do one talk that was where we looked at different examples of works of the arts, and we talked about what each kind of work was doing to grow imagination. And I think that's something important you would need to know if you were going to be someone making those things. So we looked at, let's see, we looked at a poem, we listened to a song, we looked at sculpture. I think it was those three things. And then I just walked through what kind of challenges and help each work is giving you. And then we talked about what is needed there and what kind of balance between challenge and help grows the imagination skill best. So I haven't done one just focused on that because I kind of wanted it to be something that everyone could enjoy. But I could easily see doing a talk where it was just focused on arts makers and about getting some idea of how to take that new understanding that, oh, my job is to grow people's imagination and use it to guide your aesthetic decision, right? Um, and that's kind of the interesting thing about it, is that if you really understand this idea clearly, it helps you make aesthetic decisions. It helps you decide whether should I make the painting look like this or like that. And if you have this sort of litmus test, it can help you make those calls. That's really kind of where I started. This is why I wanted to know what the arts were for, because I thought I can't make a good work of the arts if I don't know why the arts are good. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't know how I'd be able to tell whether I was getting better or not if I didn't know what they were for. And of course, the exciting thing about it, really, to me, is that if you really understand this idea, you can make the work you make better, but you can also make new forms of the arts. If you really get an understanding of how challenges and help need to be balanced and what kinds of challenges and help you need to grow imagination, you can say, oh, I'll just take this over here and make a new form of the arts. So it tells you what all the arts have in common, so you can make a new kind of form of the arts. And that's the thing is we think of, there are so many different forms of the arts now. We think of them as sort of set in stone. They've been around, a lot of them for a long time, but there's so many more that we haven't invented yet. So I think if you really understand what the arts are for, it makes it much easier to try and invent a new form of the arts. Any other questions? Thanks for coming by anyway. I appreciate it. You don't have to ask a question if you don't want to.
It looks like Maria just asked, do you think you do this by leaving some things open to interpretation to the viewer when you are making things?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the way I frame it is just really simple. Is like I was saying earlier, every work of the art says, "Can you imagine this?" That's the beginning and end of the job you have as an arts maker. Is you have to help them begin imagining. So that's part of why leaving things open to interpretation is helpful. If everything's spelled out, then there's nothing for you to imagine, right? Um, and I think that's one of the things that we could talk about if we were sort of critiquing works, is how much room is there for me to do my own imagining? Because some people, when they make works, they spend all the time getting me to imagine exactly what they want me to imagine. And that should be in there, right? They should have some ideas of things they want to sort of give me options of things I can imagine. But it's a tricky thing to learn how to do, to have the kind of maturity and confidence to say, and now I'm just going to create a clearing for you to imagine whatever you want. I don't need to pull you by the nose the whole time. And those to me are the sort of like the more accomplished works that you can tell that they have the confidence and the courage and the trust. They trust the viewer or the listener or the whatever enough to not feel like they have to control them every second of the experience. So I think that's a very important aspect of how you grow someone's imagination is to give them options to choose from and then let them choose from those options, including an option that says, I just want to imagine my own thing for a minute. Because you're really just making that space for them to imagine. And it's not necessary or it's not even possible to get everyone to imagine the exact thing you're imagining. You're just trying to get the imagination boat sailing. And where it ends up is not as important as so much that the journey, the imagining is happening. Yeah, I gotta get the chat thing open. Chat, there we go. Thanks, pattern. Says here, does imagination and consciousness have similarities? Um, I would actually, they're connected. And actually that diagram, maybe I'll go back and find that diagram again. See if I share this one. Let me go back a few. Okay, we're gonna be rewinding, folks. That one, whoops, that one there. So this diagram here that shows transparency in and transformation out is kind of a diagram of consciousness. In my way of thinking, there are three parts of consciousness. There's perceptual, the left side. There's cognition, which is knowledge and imagination together. And there's behaviors on the right side. And to me, those are the three aspects of consciousness. You have perception, cognition, and behavior. So those are the three sort of dimensions of consciousness. So I think of imagination as being inside of the center aspect of consciousness. Imagination is sort of, like I say, the interpreter on the left side and the initiator on the right side. So imagination is, I think imagination is what causes consciousness. Because if you take this thing and you take imagination out, what you have is every other animal, every other non-human thing. Perception's coming in, somehow turning into knowledge, and then that knowledge using that to create behaviors. There's no, or not as much, let's put it that way, interpretation and initiation in terms of processing. Most animals, things are fight or flight, instinct and intuition. There's no conscious processing, and imagination is what makes us conscious. So I think that'd be my answer to that question. It's kind of the central thing that makes humans human. And then that's the reason why it's behind all of our uniquely human survival skills and characteristics and everything else. And that's one of the things I want people to understand, is that imagination is much more important than we think of it as. And like I say, we're swimming in it all the time. We're just not conscious of imagination itself. Okay, let's see. Thanks for that answer. Love that metaphor. Okay, thank you. What else was I going to say? Yeah, there's lots of things, like I said, we could talk about, but I tried to minimize it, sort of pack it into just 40 minutes or so. But that's I think a good sort of intro. Each one of the things I kind of walked through, each one of those can be its own talk if you want. We could do a whole talk just on the relationship between knowledge and imagination, which I've done that talk before. There's so much you can say about each one of those things. So I like to think of this as just sort of introductory, just a primer, to get people started thinking about it and maybe talking about those things. Okay. Oh, there's Boy Towns. What's up?
Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
hey, just a
Um,
suggestion. Can you hear me?
yeah, yeah. Mhm,
Just a suggestion. I think
mhm,
I would be fascinated to see you juxtapose your thinking with Lacanian psychoanalysis. He has a structure that begins with imagination
mhm,
and then includes the symbolic and the real. So that would be, he's also, very interested in art.
right.
So, yeah, psychoanalytic dimension from Lacan, especially starting with the imaginary, would be something I'd like you to, compare to this.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's I guess kind of what this is in a nutshell. Is I'm trying to explain the psychological reason we need the arts, right? How it helps the imagination in our mind. So it's a question of psychology, and of course, virtues are also a question of psychology of perception, cognition, and behavior. That's psychology is kind of the science of looking at behavior to guess at cognition and then somehow to guess at how that person is also perceiving. So you're looking at behavior to guess how they're using their knowledge and imagination to then guess what they might be perceiving and interpreting with their imagination. So I've read a lot of stuff, particularly about virtues for this talk and for other talks I've done, because I wanted to understand or I wanted to explain to people how, as I did shortly today, how virtues and imagination connect to the arts. So I thought I want to explain that the arts grow imagination, but I thought if I just say the arts grow imagination, they'll just nod and be like, yeah, and so what? I thought, well, I need to explain how imagination is necessary to something they value so that people can understand the value of already. I thought virtues would be a good place to do that. I thought, oh, if I show you how virtues need imagination, then you'll understand why growing imagination, which is what the arts do, is important. So I have done a lot of reading about virtues just so I could frame it better. And it's a fascinating subject, obviously, and similar to the arts in the sense that both virtues and the arts, people think of them as things you can't study scientifically. But there are people who are trying to do that, say, no, science can come in here and say logical things about this, even though it seems like a different world. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways you can reframe the things I'm talking about. Um, as I say, shift your perspective with your imagination, shift how you're thinking about it, and that can help you see things more clearly, maybe. Okay, well, I don't want to keep people too long. We're getting towards an hour here. What do you think, Glenn? Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I noticed that Maria had one
Okay.
question about types of art to expose oneself to or consume. She pointed out that there's a fuzzy line between
Uh-huh.
art and cheaper art forms like social media. How do we
Mhm.
know what type of art to consume? Maybe we'll end on that one.
Sure. Well, um, that one would probably be a whole nother talk, but it's a good question. Um, and that's one of the next talks I'd like to do is to talk about how do you choose works, right? If you say to yourself, okay, Lonnie, I get what you're saying, the arts grow our imagination. All right, so I have a responsibility to grow my own imagination. Well, how do I know? Should I watch that movie or that movie? How can I guess? And that's one of the things we could talk about. It's basically what you're doing is it's all, I guess, of probabilities. And you're asking yourself, based on what I know about the thing, is the probability high or low that it will grow my imagination? And so part of that is understanding what kind of challenges and help you would need to grow your imagination. So we'd have to talk more about that. But and that's not easy. I have the same problem as everybody else. I mean, I think to myself, oh yeah, I need to grow my imagination. So you go to your, you know, Netflix or whatever, and you're trying to pick out a movie, and I'm trying to think, well, which one of these is going to grow my imagination? And a lot of times you don't know. And that's one of the things about the arts is we crave them, we chase after them because we need them. We need them to survive. We have a hunger for them, but then we have to trust that the person will actually give us what we need. And then that's a little bit of the problem is, but it's especially a problem because the people making them don't know that that's what we need from them. they're doing their best and trying this or that. They're just sort of fumbling in the dark. They're not aiming at growing our imagination. So I think if they understood that that's what we need from them, then they'd have a much better shot of hitting that. It's sort of like shooting arrows in the dark. You don't know which direction the target is, how far away it is. How are you ever going to hit it? But if you said to someone, "Oh, yeah, I want you to shoot these arrows in the dark, but the target is 100 feet away, it's about 3 feet high, and it's in this direction," and they're like, "Oh, well, now I have a shot. Maybe I'll hit it." And that's the thing with most arts, and this is why we keep listening to more music. You're never done listening to music, or you're never done listening or watching movies or TV or whatever, reading novels, because you always need more. And most of them don't work. They don't really do it enough. You're still hungry. You still want more. So that's the challenge. And so I hope we can talk more about that in a longer talk and get really in detail with that so that people will have more tools to help them choose works. And so understand, like when they get done, they're like, wow, that was great. Why was that great? And you'll be able to say, oh, because it did these things. Oh, that's why. And then each time you have that, you'll get better and better at choosing things, I think. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you coming today. Thanks for showing up. Yeah, and as I said, let us know what you thought. You can leave comments here or wherever. Send them to Alchemy Art Center if you want to hear more talks like this, and check back in with us. And just thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lonnie. That was awesome. Thanks for visiting us via the internet. And yeah, if you want to learn more about Alchemy Art Center and some of what we do, you can check out www.alchemyartcenter.com. It's art singular center, no S on the end of art. Thank you so much for that awesome talk. And yeah, I would love to hear more in this series. I think we just kind of touched the very surface and it was extremely intriguing and loved it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also.
All right. Well, we'll send you all the link to the video. So share it far and wide. Have a great night, everybody.